3, 2, 1. This is What's Left America. I'm Chris Tritico.
I'm Andy Georgeson.
I'm James Campbell.
And I'm Chris Bell.
What's Left America is proudly produced by Left Out Media and brought to you by the generosity of our sponsors and friends, and hopefully someday, friends just like you. Today on the show, we're going to cover America Walled Off, Was It a Tweet, America's fastest growing game show, Inclusion, the 116th Congress, and of course we're going to end the show with Out of Left Field. Just like always, let's get right into the show. America Walled Off. With a partial government shutdown entering its third week, negotiations between President Trump and congressional Democrats seem to be going absolutely nowhere. I'd love to be in that room. We want $5.6 billion. No. Okay, let's go home. I think that really is about all they do.
Yeah, it's just the silliness of this whole shutdown. It's unnecessary, and it's only being done because Trump is playing to his base again. And you know what I hate about this whole thing is how we become prisoners of the moment and what Trump does to play to the base. He had a deal. He said this morning before he left to go to Camp David that there are no options on the table. He had plenty of options on the table. He had a deal for
that he agreed to.
That he agreed to until his conservative talk show base began to call him a weasel, and he backed off that deal. So hundreds of thousands of people's lives are in the balance while they argue this.
Well, there's the base, but then there are also Republicans who have taken a responsible look at immigration who are saying a wall is not really a big part of the solution or any part of the solution, including the interim chief of staff, Mulvaney, who has previously been quoted as saying that it was almost childish for him to pretend that a wall would be some type of panacea.
I read something in the New York Times yesterday that I thought was great. Nancy Pelosi, the new and this time around well-fortified Speaker of the House, had the best line on the wall. She says, "He's now down to, I think, a beaded curtain or something."
But the scary thing is, last week we were talking about our hope that it might be political theater, but this isn't political theater when 800,000 people are out of work and not receiving paychecks, and what's happening in national parks and all across the country. This is an absolute nightmare.
And the president's boxed himself right into a corner on this because he's saying, I'm going to keep the government shut for months or years until I get my $5.6 billion. And Nancy Pelosi said, I'm not giving you one penny. And I think that this ends when the Senate Republicans lose their will, because what's going to happen is you're going to start seeing stories about people losing their houses or threatening. The banks are going to say, well, we don't really care, and you have to make your mortgage payment. And you're going to see federal workers starting to be threatened to lose their mortgages, their houses, and there's going to be real life stories of people in trouble over this government shutdown. And that's when the Senate Republicans are going to say, we're not going to stand for this anymore. And that's when the the Republicans are going to back down. And that's going to be the end.
Well, look at what's going on with the IRS. I mean, people are waiting on their refunds. They're not going to get them because 90% of the workforce has been cut. And that's a big part of our economy, people getting those refunds and spending them. What's going on with food stamps, people not putting that money back into grocery stores. So it's having real economic impact.
So the third longest shutdown was 2013, which lasted for 18 days. This is approaching that now.
Right.
And the difference, I think, is now compared to then, Chris, is that you had somebody sane in the White House who really wanted to make a deal. And the Republicans knew, I think, as they do now, that they're going to get punished in the elections in 2020, and I think they hope they understand that. But what you lack, you just talked about the Senate Republicans. That takes leadership, Chris. You always call for leadership. Well, Mitch McConnell is an invertebrate. He doesn't have any backbone, and you need backbone and somebody who's going to stand up to this president and not being afraid of being primaried or tweeted about and blaming it on the Republicans. Right now, he's saying that it's the Democrats, it's Nancy Pelosi's fault. But if the Republicans in the Senate cave, then he's going to turn his guns on them.
Well, but when there's not enough votes for Mitch McConnell to keep doing what he's going to do, he's going to have to bring it to the floor. He's going to get outvoted pretty soon. And when the Republican base starts eroding away, Mitch McConnell is not going to be able to keep doing what he's doing.
Well, as an invertebrate, I mean, he could be a snake, couldn't he? And just bite Donald Trump on the ass. I mean, something like that.
Here's a tweet. This is not the game. Here's a tweet that Donald Trump sent. I think it was yesterday.
Oh, I thought we were going to play the game.
Nope, this is a real tweet. Because of my Trump shutdown, food stamps for 38 million Americans will end in February. Good. Because only the poor, the elderly, the disabled, and the kids get food stamps. All of them are Democrats. A little hunger will force everyone to do what I say.
Are you serious?
Is
this a real tweet?
He absolutely sent that out.
Man.
The President of the United States sent that out and said it's okay for kids and disabled to go hungry because they're all Democrats.
The handful of faithful subscribers that we have will remember that last week I said that this shutdown feels different because we have a chaos president. And rather than it being just a bit of political theater, it's just a wild card, roll the dice kind of situation, some level of brinksmanship. It's going to get real interesting when the Senate Republicans cave, make some kind of deal with the Democrats. Democrats hold all the cards, should not give a dime, and then they send a bill to the president's desk and he doesn't sign it.
They'll just have to be enough to override a veto.
Well, that is going to be an interesting situation, isn't it? When you've got then you're going to have a complete rebellion amongst the Republicans, and maybe that'll break open the logjam that we have in the floodgates, and then they could just go back to governing. But right now, the president is sticking to his guns, and let him veto a bill that they send
But
over
also,
with no border
if he
funding.
hadn't been such an absolute asshole about it, and the way he campaigned on it, and the way he's drawn the line in the sand, I think the Democrats would have probably worked with him if it was a measure in certain places to do fencing and that kind of thing, which they've done in the past.
They voted for in the past.
Right. And so it wouldn't have been that big a deal. But because of the way he's handled it and with this complete lack of compassion, then obviously they can't support it.
I'm glad you brought up the way he campaigned on it, because there's a very interesting story out in the Times about the campaign and the way he campaigned on it, is that it never was anything in the campaign.
In terms of a policy.
In terms of a policy, it was just a device for him to remember to talk about immigration.
And that's the damn shame about this, Chris, is that this guy who couldn't focus to read a strip basically had to have some words handed to him that became a chant at his rallies. But let's just call
wait a minute. That chant became
policy that he's fighting now that shut down the freaking government.
Just holding the government hostage.
Yeah, and that's the whole tragedy of this whole thing. And the thing that the Republicans and the Trump administration, this is what bothers me. Sarah Sanders went on Fox News today to try to continue this narrative that 4,000 terrorists are caught at the border. Chris Wallace basically called her on her bullshit and said, look, most of those people are apprehended at airports and ports of entry, not at the southern border. She fumbled and could not respond to Trump's narrative that he has out there for his base, that you have gangsters and criminals and terrorists coming in through the southern border. The reality is interdictions at the border are down.
Right.
Yeah, immigration at the border is like almost non-existent. Yeah, people are coming through, but think that this is a freaking national emergency? That's ridiculous.
Mostly
on
people
its
with
face.
expired
The
visas.
shutdown
isn't it?
is going to be a national emergency.
Well, it's,
Yeah, it will
The
be
shutdown will
if
be.
they don't come to a deal.
now,
But there's no way he would be able to sell that in order to just override Congress.
well, I was
don't-
about to bring that up because you remember Congress, and he is now talking about declaring it a national emergency and using his emergency powers to override Congress and just build it anyway.
funding clearly rests with Congress.
Does
And
he have
so
the right to do it?
No. And how can he claim that it's suddenly an emergency when it hasn't been an emergency up to this point in time? Nothing has really changed. And there's no facts that he can use to support that something's different now than was a week ago or 2 weeks
I mean,
ago.
if Harry Truman didn't have the authority to use his emergency powers to nationalize the steel industry during World War II, I don't know how President Trump is going to have the authority to do this now.
But well, Chris, let's call here we are again, caught up in the prisoner of the latest Trump thing. And the reality is that is just a talking point that he threw out for his base to basically act like he is doing something or saying something, and that he's drawn a line in the sand, and he's gonna like somehow nationalize this issue and call a state of emergency and have our troops, people out there building. That's
was a
not
But
gonna
nobody
happen.
thought he would shut down the government over this stupid thing until Laura Ingraham and Rush Limbaugh called him a weenie. I'm not going to say he won't do this.
But how can he get that done? You have to have legal hurdles
Right.
to jump. You have to basically show that there's a real and imminent threat to the country.
He did
And this
not
is-
care. He did not care about the fact that he couldn't close the border to immigrants when he did it 3 times after the U.S. Supreme Court said twice,
So
you
now-
can't do this.
Yeah, so now he's just talking shit. Is that
No,
what
he's
you're
going to.
saying?
I think he will do it and get sued and get shut down. I don't think he cares. I don't think he cares.
But that's not the point. The point is calling a national emergency, and that's not going to happen because it has to go to the courts, and the courts are going to say, "What's the threat?"
the president will say, I'm declaring a national emergency. I'm declaring these funds from these departments to build this wall, and then get sued and shut down. I think he will do it anyway and then get stopped, so that he can go to his people and say, I did it. The Democrats stopped me because they don't care. That's the issue.
I'm not suggesting that he won't, but that is, insane.
Oh, well,
Well,
there.
that's-
Now we all agree.
Yeah, I don't know what I can add to that. The president is definitely in escalation mode.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to put anything past him, even when it's doing things like sending a bunch of troops to the border. Costs a lot of money.
To mobilize those troops.
Yeah, it cost a lot of hardship
politics.
for those families, and achieved absolutely nothing but pictures that he could show to his base, and he's being encouraged by these crazies on Fox. And as long as that's where he's getting his marching orders, he will do whatever. And then it's incumbent upon the rest of the country that is not in his purview to make sure it doesn't happen. But in the meantime, there's not a lot of governing going on.
Yeah.
But
So
but also keep in mind
probably a
though,
good
so
thing.
we have a public policy which grew out of a chant, and then as far as using these emergency powers, that was a response to a question.
Right.
Now, a responsible president would have said, "We haven't even discussed that."
Right.
But of course, he says, "Well, I just might do it," and then he's going to do it.
Yeah, it sounds good, so I'll do it.
Incredible.
So, Chris, one final point. That New York Times story pointed out that Trump should, because this chant became policy, is now in a position where he has to make a deal. And the Republicans are worried that he's going to make a bad deal. I want to suggest that the Democrats have some power, but they have to be really careful about overreaching and not giving Trump what he wants.
No, the Democrats are not there. Nancy Pelosi, when she made the joke about the beaded curtain, she is signaling, let him just have his temper tantrum. She's the mom who's going to just watch and walk away. And when he's good and ready to settle down, then we'll come back and talk. I do not think the Democrats feel like there's any pressure on them whatsoever.
I know.
To
I get that.
any money for a wall.
I get that, but what I worry about is that the American public and the court of public opinion, there's a group of people out there who may see them as obstructionists and not really trying to, the Trump narrative now is that these Democrats just want to hurt this president, and they're talking about impeachment.
isn't
and
that
they're
what-
gonna-
isn't
Do we
that-
have a
And
sense at
800,000
all-
lives
and-
puts
and-
pressure on everybody.
Yeah,
But isn't
I know, and that's the whole point. I
Yeah.
think we need to be careful not to, think that we have all the cards here.
But isn't that why
And-
isn't that why the House's first act was to pass legislation
Sure.
to
Right.
reopen the government immediately?
And they are governing as you suggested.
I mean, we have legislation ready for the Senate to
Right.
reopen the government today, Mr.
In the form
President.
of-
Just
Yeah.
sign it.
continuing
Yeah.
resolutions.
Yeah, and
and
the one thing that Pelosi knows how to do is count votes, and she has control of her party, and that's the good thing about the Democratic Congress
yes,
now.
and I'll tell you one thing all about the Democrats who are on food stamps and all these other things. They know that the Democrats are on their side, and not this wall doesn't have anything to do with their suffering. They know who is causing them to suffer.
Well, it's a whole bunch of people in West Virginia who are on food stamps and are Trump's base.
All right, let's move
Well-
on. Let's move on. Was it a tweet? America's fastest growing game show. Now, last year we're going to start with a new game this week. Last year, I think that coming right back from nowhere, Andy was the big winner last year. Right? Did you win 2 games?
I did.
And Chris Bell won none.
No, I finally got on the board and tied.
One tie, and James won 1. So Andy was the big winner. James came in second. Chris brought up the rear with 1 tie. So you're going to keep the stats for this year.
I got it.
All right. So starting a new year, 2019, everybody's starting out even. So here we go. First tweet of the 2019 season. USA could control oil prices if at Obama would open the Alaskan North Slope drilling.
That was a tweet.
Tweet.
Fake.
Whoa. All right.
All right.
What'd you say?
One for Bell.
She said tweet.
Oh, she said tweet?
She said everybody said tweet. Everybody missed that one.
Okay.
If a person is number 1 at Harvard and comes from Europe or Asia, they can't get into the U.S. from Mexico, etc., with a criminal record, no problem.
Tweet.
Okay, because I don't understand.
You mean to read it again?
I say no, not a tweet.
I say not a tweet.
That was a tweet.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Don't believe the media stories. OPEC and the Saudis have not been doing any. No, I got to start over. I messed that up. Don't believe the media stories. OPEC and the Saudis have not been doing us any favors recently with oil outputs. Oil should be $30 a barrel.
Not a tweet.
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 That was a tweet.
And this is why Bell is bringing up the rear in 2019 again.
All right. Number 4. How we doing? What's the stats there, James?
I am ahead 2-1. Chris 0.
All right. Chris needs to make a run here. 83% of the government is still running during the shutdown, while 41% of non-defense federal workers are furloughed. Room for cuts.
Tweet.
Not a tweet.
Not a tweet.
Tweet.
Damn it.
You got that. Right?
Yeah. All right. Number 5. I would spend more time at Camp David if there was a golf course. Nothing to do.
Not a tweet.
Not a tweet.
Not a tweet.
That was not a tweet.
Well, okay.
How did we do? That was it. Did we have a tie?
So
or
we have a tie between me and Andrea.
All right.
And Chris is last.
Chris Bell is out.
Like his Texans.
I'm just going to take my nuts and go home.
All right. Here's the tiebreaker question. Stocks rose yesterday during the first day. Start again. Stocks rose yesterday during the first day of government shutdown. Markets like being left alone for a day.
Tweet.
Not a tweet.
Tweet. Andy takes the lead in the first round of the
New Year.
New Year. Was it a tweet? All right.
All right.
And for you all not watching the video version, we're eating some almonds here.
Because
Hence the nut reference.
eating on the air is always a good thing to do.
For you all listening
Well,
and hearing us eating the nuts, we're eating nuts here.
well, look,
But
we
I
aren't
think-
drinking on the air like the CNN people
Right.
were doing on New Year's Eve. Like,
Oh my God, this is the first time we're not drinking on the air.
Oh, I know. What's
we're giving
going
ourselves
on?
a lot of credit.
I know.
This is our statement for a dry January.
Yeah.
Or a dry
We're
Sunday in
getting
January.
prepared for Lent season.
All right, here we go.
here we go.
Inclusion, the 116th Congress, 116th Congress. Democrats stormed back to power last week, taking control of the House and electing Nancy Pelosi as Speaker for the second time. Here's what the House looks like. It's bluer. Democrats claim 235 to a 199 majority, with one seat still open because of that North Carolina seat. I think it was North Carolina that they refused
the
to seat.
scandal. Yeah.
Refused to seat the guy. It's a younger Congress. The freshman group this year is 10 years younger on average than the outgoing Congress. More women. 43 of the incoming members of Congress are women, with 37 new female representatives, 6 of the female senators. More people of color. The new Congress is the most racially diverse ever, with 23 new people of color. Many of the candidates are first in their state, including Andy Kim, New Jersey's first Asian American representative, and Rashida Tlaib, the first Palestinian American elected to Congress, and the first 2 Native Americans ever to serve, and more veterans. Both parties welcome members who served the military, adding 7 Democratic veterans and 12 Republican veterans. How about that?
I think that's a beautiful thing for the Democratic Party. What you didn't talk about, Chris, is that some of these members who were elected were insurgents. They were people that the party didn't support, which says a lot about the Democrat and how we expand our tent while the Republicans talk about it.
It was really incredible to see the difference. On the Democratic side, there was a there was a show of what America looks like, you know,
Yeah, it was.
in aggregate, not at church in the morning.
Yeah.
Because then it's just everybody for
I thought
himself.
it was-
As if you would
or
know.
synagogue or
I
and
thought
all
it was
the different places, the houses of worship is what I should say.
Especially Bell's
Or even
Church.
neighborhoods. So let's not go overboard. We're a very segregated country, but we are made up of a lot of different groups of people, and they were all on display on the Democratic side of the House.
Well, but that's
and on
an-
the other side, it was disturbingly white.
Yeah,
and male.
and that's the problem. All of the diversity is on the
Democratic
Democratic
side.
side, and so the divide in the country just grows that much wider. And when I was in Congress, I used to say, if you need to know what a bunch of old white men think about any subject, you
Come
don't
on
have to walk
down.
very far. just
Across
to
the aisle.
just to the other side, and they're not changing. And so it's amazing how the divide just keeps. They just are never going to wake up.
I feel like it's such a clear choice now that people who want government that is representative of the country as a whole are flocking to the side where it's apparent that that is a value, and people who don't and their wives are flocking to the other side. And so you're right, the divide is becoming starker, and I'm not sure what to do about it, but I'm glad that at least one party, because it used to be that the whole Congress looked like the Republican side, but one party has made efforts, and those efforts are paying off.
But I do hope that we have this moment of celebration and then that we move on, because I do worry about the Democratic Party becoming the party of identity politics and it
Well,
all being
right.
about.
Don't fall for the okey doke, man.
Yeah,
Don't
I
fall for the
disagree
okey
with
doke.
that.
I mean, every time
I don't know
the
what the
Republicans,
okey-doke is.
Well, let me tell you. Every
From
time
Oklahoma, I think.
every time the Republicans don't like something that the Democrats do that's working, every time there's a policy initiative that is working, the Republicans are great at labeling. That's why we had Obamacare instead of the Affordable Care Act. That's why we have identity politics instead of inclusive politics. Just because it's called a word that sounds scary and bad doesn't mean that it is scary and bad. It is
Right.
good. We are not interested in identity politics as Republicans, as people on the left. We are interested in everyone having a voice and everyone being considered when policies are made. So
I don't think
I
that's
don't
what
think you
Chris was
understand
talking
where I'm
about.
going.
just
Inclusion.
the fact
in-
that you said identity
No,
politics.
well, it can be. And
well,
inclusion,
define identity
hold on.
politics.
Inclusion
Trying to.
is a wonderful thing. And I'm glad that we have a Congress now that looks more like America. And I said we should celebrate that fact. But it can't just all be about how diverse we are. And it shouldn't be just because I'm a woman or just because I'm this or just because I'm that. That's why you should vote for me. And I do tire of that to a certain degree.
I don't remember anybody running that way.
Right.
I mean, there's no example that I can think of. I know that people emphasized their backgrounds, but every politician does that.
Sure.
But that does not equal identity politics. And let us, who are on the side of the left, not use these terms and give them more resonance than they deserve.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Chris, I agree with you a lot, but I have to kind of reject that whole term of identity politics. I hear that a lot, especially from the right. And what that says to me is that only minorities, only women, only people of color can have identity politics.
And everybody else is the standard.
But if white guys who are millionaires or billionaires are attracted to the GOP, does that make them identify with the GOP because the GOP is white or because they have values that they respect?
Well, I sat in a room during the campaign and listened to a Hispanic running for the United States Senate from a different state tell a group of largely Hispanic individuals that you need to support me and give me money because it's our turn. That's identity politics. If you sit there and say it's our turn, and to a group of Hispanics,
but I think you misinterpret that because when you hear African American or Hispanics say that, what they're saying is, in my mind, is that it's time for us to step up because our demographic is emerging and we should be able to capitalize on that emerging numbers. The country's brown now, basically. Even African Americans have to step back because the Latinos have emerged as a voting and democratic power, and for him to suggest that, it's our turn, and that's just a form of expressing.
If she had said what you just said, I wouldn't have been the least bit offended.
Okay,
That's not
but
what
you
she
need to
said at
stop.
all.
Let me not make it personal.
Who's you?
Let me not make it personal. If someone says it's our turn, if you don't feel like you belong to the group that's being spoken of, please don't be afraid. It is the turn for people who have not been represented in the government to have a turn at the table, to have a voice in the government. It is my turn. It is James Campbell's turn. It is Hispanic, Native American. It is all of our turn to have a seat at the table. Don't get nervous.
It's not a bad point.
We're not saying, no one is saying, and it is not white men's turn anymore. Like, we must get rid of them. Be careful that you don't internalize the rhetoric that the other side is using to scare you away. Not you, Chris Bell, but people.
That's not a bad point.
Well,
Then I'll leave it at that.
agreeing with you.
So I just want to talk about my experience just for a little bit. So I've been involved with diversity issues when I was in the newspaper and even when I left the newspaper to get into public relations. And it's always been that there were very few minorities or people of color in the newsrooms. And so I always tried to do my best to attract qualified minorities to work in the Chronicles newsroom, because I think that when you have minorities who are covering communities in a place like Houston, the fourth largest city, the paper is a better read, I think. And you basically bring communities that have been in the shadows out of the shadows. And so from a political perspective, and Chris, you know this because you've been in politics, you reached out across, all communities. Those people want you to come in and talk to them about, policies and politics and how you can use government to make their lives better. That does not necessarily preclude a minority who's running for an office to say it's our turn, because we need to step up and become a part of this process. And so when they say that, it's not a threat.
Well,
it's basically a call to action.
Well, some
in my
do.
mind.
Some do, but I think we would be disingenuous to suggest that some people don't look for folks who look like them. And it's problematic from my point of view because most white people who have continue to be active in the Democratic Party wanted to join with the Democratic Party because they saw it as the party that would lift all people up, that would celebrate diversity. And then if we get to a point, well, look, y'all have had your turn and you need to move on, and now it's just about finding people who look like me or who identify more closely with me, then I think that's a real problem.
But luckily we just explained to you that that's not what it is. So you can rest your mind that no one is doing that. We still need white folk.
Yeah,
And
I don't think that's
everybody's welcome.
But if you look at some of the people who were elected in this recent Congress with this new and this emerging demographic, many of them were elected in districts that weren't even minority, and so minority and people of color are having a campaign across color lines now.
Right.
If you want to blame it on some Hispanic or black politician going into a gerrymandered district and talking to the people who are going to elect them, yeah. But if you're talking about being in Minnesota or being in a place where, there are more whites than there are blacks or Hispanics, and these people are getting elected, then they perhaps have evolved as politicians to be able to talk about democratic values and why they should be voting for them as a Democratic candidate.
All right, let's talk about a few other things. Yeah. I found this leaked memo that Nancy Pelosi had. I don't know if she's happy it got leaked or not. She may have leaked it herself, as far as I know.
thought.
Yeah. About her priorities. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about what her priorities should be. And this was her top 9 priorities. Address corruption. Democrats plan to take up in this House Bill 1 sweeping plan to attack corruption. While legislation is not likely to get through the Senate, the party hopes to use it to address messages that cast Trump administration as amoral. 2, address the disparity of income in America. Well, let's just kind of slow down here. I'll go through them and then we can talk about them. 3, be the champions of the middle class. 4, face the existential threat of our time, climate change. 5, push for lower health costs in the prescription drug prices. 6, ensure protections for people with pre-existing medical conditions. 7, overhaul the U.S. infrastructure. And 9, raise the minimum wage. The House hopes to get $15 an hour minimum wage, which they've been pushing for that for 20 years. What do y'all think ought to be the focus here? I
thought it was a great list.
It is a good list, but it's a list they're not going to get through in a year.
Not with all those issues, but I do think she's outlined the priorities pretty well.
Yeah.
I was a little confused at first when I saw address corruption because I thought that was a postal office issue.
Yeah, that was
first.
my typing. That was my typing.
But no, and I think that's been a while since that's been looked at, and this is a perfect time given who's in the White House, and climate change obviously needs to receive as much attention as possible, and the income disparity people need to be talking about, but not just talking about, but looking for ways to do something about it. And like you said, minimum wage, oldie but a goodie, but the only way you're going to do anything about it is on the national level.
But isn't all of this DOA in the Senate?
I'm sorry.
All of this is dead on arrival in the Senate. I mean, none of this gets addressed in the Senate, does it?
But Chris, that doesn't mean they shouldn't fight this, because the Republicans tried to repeal Obamacare a zillion times, and it was basically dead on arrival.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that, as Chris pointed out, this is a great blueprint for the Democrats in Congress to follow. And I think the first priority should be reopening the government, and number two, they need to work on fixing Obamacare and not overreaching and going for a single payer plan right off the bat, because I think that would be a non-starter. That's just my opinion. I know there are a lot of progressives in the new Congress, but I think you start with, fixing Obamacare, and I wish they had put as much energy into trying to fix it back in the day rather than trying to save it and get it off life support now.
Somebody announced they were going to hold hearings on single payer already.
Yeah, I mean,
hearings on that.
That should be absolutely a discussion, and it was probably part of the deal
Right.
that Pelosi cut with some of these incoming, hardcore progressives and socialists. And so those are the kind of discussions that people who govern actually have. They don't just talk about stuff. The Republicans always talk about the Democrats being the party of no. The Republicans are the party of no. They don't want to move an agenda for the American people forward, and that's the problem.
I like the list. I don't know about the ranking of the various issues. But some of them seem a little bit overlapping. You address income disparity, and you will also take care of the middle class at the same time. I don't know if overhauling U.S. infrastructure comes before. I mean, I don't know. Throw in raising the minimum wage with fixing the income disparity and addressing the middle class. I feel like you could say the same kinds of things and make the list a little bit more concise, and then also. We could make something fit on a bumper sticker for once. So it's a good list, and let's stick to it, and let's not. I'm troubled that address corruption is the very first thing, because it's like reopening the government. It's sort of just a given that should be going on in the background. But while we are trying to figure out, where the corruption is, our main focus is going to be fixing these serious problems that the country is facing right now.
Well, I disagree a little bit, because we talked a lot last summer during the campaign about there not really being a message for the Democratic Party. And this message may be a little long, but I do think that they've done a good job of sort of laying out what people ran on and what people are concerned about, and what, as the Democratic Party,
this is what we are.
We should be concerned about. And as far as you're right. I mean, the Republicans do a lot better job of getting things, that fit on a bumper sticker. But that's why you get things like build a wall and have it become policy.
But you think about the Contract for America that worked pretty darn good for the Republicans
and
back
it
then.
Involved a lot of stuff.
It involved a whole lot of
for the
stuff.
country.
Well, but yes, it was
I just want
overall
people to
bad
be
for
able
the
to
country.
remember what the priorities are, and everybody can use an editor. Just edit it a little bit into a simpler format, and then when you ask a Democrat, well, what does your party stand for? Then they can say, oh, I know what the priorities of my party are. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bam. That's my main point. I have no problem with the actual issues that.
Well, let's just say this: it's a hell of a lot easier on our side right now than it is on the Republican side to answer that question.
But we have to also remember that this is basically a wish list. We control one part of Congress, And I think that, Trump can go out and say, I fought for a wall. I gave you tax cuts. I brought back clean coal in West Virginia and all those things and have something to campaign on. We have to have a signature win. And if we don't have a signature win,
and when the House passes, most of this in the next year, or several of these in the next year, they'll have something to run on.
Well, but as Donald Trump pointed out, the reason the Democrats are attacking him like they are is because he has been such a productive president.
Yes, yeah, the most productive ever. The most productive.
Yeah.
He's done better than Lincoln. He's done better than Lincoln.
In his first 2 years, he's done more than any president,
That's right.
prime minister,
Known to man.
conqueror, dictator
That's right.
in the history of mankind.
What did George Washington do for this country, by God?
It's like Abraham Lincoln is like rolling in his grave right now.
Roosevelt, come on, what did he do? Really, really, what did he do? All right,
Truman,
let's,
terrible president.
all right, let's move on. Let's move it out of left field. Who wants to go first?
Mine is easy. I just want to recommend Michelle Obama's book, Becoming Michelle Obama. It's really good. If it's not a political memoir, although clearly she's going to talk about her life, not in politics, but attached to politics. But she's a really good writer, and it's really fun, and it moves along, and it's interesting. And it made me think about, I heard two little girls from Africa who want to go to medical school. They were high school girls, and they said that they were inspired by Ben Carson's book, something Hands. I can't remember the name, but I bought it many years ago when my three boys were very young. Here is a black man who's a brain surgeon. I want you to read his book. Gifted Hands is the name of the book. I want you to read this book. We read it out loud. Surely they're going to be brain surgeons. Anyway, he turned out to be an idiot. But today, I would read Becoming Michelle Obama to my kids and also not have to worry about her ending up being a knucklehead. Yeah, yeah. It's a good read. You should get it.
Well, thanks. I'm going to get that for Lakshmi. But so we talked earlier.
That's sexist. Why wouldn't you just get it for yourself?
And we could like
thing.
share that
Yeah.
read,
More
just
to share.
because I give it to her can't mean that I can't say, honey, can you let me read that?
So it's
when
not
you
really a
finish it?"
gift at all. It's not really a gift at all.
Well, it's like a house gift.
There you go with that identity politics once again.
Anyway, earlier we talked about the diversity and how the Congress looks more like America. This show, the Golden Globes are going on tonight, and by the time this show is posted, they will be over. But two things they're going to talk about are two huge grossing movies from 2018, The Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians. Those two movies grossed more than any movies last year. And the reason why they did is because Americans and people flocked to the theaters to see, another culture celebrated, and we could all appreciate that. And that's what I think this country is. This is a country that I think celebrates diversity and the differences. And the Republicans need to understand that the world around them is evolving. And if you look at these two movies as emblematic of that, then they will understand that they need to get out the way.
They don't even get that the world evolved previously.
Well, some of them have gotten their knuckles off the ground. So.
So my out of left field this week has to do with politics and stereotyping and causing people economic disparity all thrown together in a neat little story. Back in 1981, the air traffic controllers went on strike, and President Ronald Reagan decided to fire all 11,000 of them. And fast forward to 2010, and my neighbors across the street were having a little Labor Day gathering, and they said their old friends from Sugarland were coming over. And I thought, oh, great, because obviously Sugarland has changed a lot in recent years, but back then it was sort of known as a predominantly conservative suburb. And I thought this will be miserable to hang out with these people. And I start talking to him and the husband, and he's a little bit older than me, and just a rabid left-winger. And I was very surprised, and it was interesting, too. They're also the couple that reintroduced me to Jen. So they did a great favor for not only me, but I think a lot of other people that get to be around me by doing that.
The alcohol industry in general.
And so they, but was a rabid left winger, and I finally said, where is this coming from? And he was an air traffic controller, and he had carried his anger from that day forward, bitter anger from getting laid off by Ronald Reagan. And so I think it is safe to say that Donald Trump, by his actions these last couple of weeks, has created about 800,000 possibly new Democrats. And that's my out of left field.
So my out of left field is, freshman Representative Rashid Tlaib this week in a rally said the Democratic House is going to go in there and impeach the mother effer, talking about President Trump. I spent 15 years coaching youth soccer, and I always told my players when I was talking to those young people, both boys and girls, that it's always important to be the biggest professional in the room. And that's very important to me, and I think Representative Rashid Tlaib could learn a lot from that, because what she did, even though President Trump invokes that type of feeling by a lot of people, especially Democrats, she was not the biggest professional in the room the other day when she said that. And I just think it demeans the entire party, and she should not have said it. Now, with that said, when President Trump, who speaks that way all the time in rallies and talks about people that way, for him to stand in front of a microphone and act like a hurt housewife who's never heard that type of language and talk as if he is somehow offended by that is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. And how dare he pretend to be offended by that? He has no right in and of himself to feign offense at that. But that's not my point. The Democrats who have taken control of the House, please, we can't afford to drop to President Trump's level. Let's be the biggest professional in the room and don't let him win by dropping to that level.
But
That's
Chris,
field.
if I can just share this, because this was a tweet from a guy named Adam Best, and I just love it. He says, "We'll stop saying motherfucker when motherfucking Border Patrol stops letting kids die and Flint has clean motherfucking water and teams stop getting shot at motherfucking school and motherfucking big banks are held accountable and we actually fight motherfucking climate change."
And that's fine.
Here, here.
Well, this is my out of left field, not his. And that's not professional, and we should not drop to his level. That's all the time we have this week. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and please rate us on iTunes. More important than that, what do we need to do, Andy?
As the Lord God said, subscribe.
It's all about subscriptions. Go to Lip Center, your favorite podcasting site, and subscribe to What's Left America. Much thanks to Vertical Ascension Entertainment for putting us on YouTube every week, and Keegan DeLeo, our in-studio producer. That's all the time we have this week. We'll catch you next week.